Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Whole Wellness Mama Summit, where we are unlocking the healthiest, less stressed mom in you using strategies from various wellness experts. I'm your host, Amy Nesbitt, and I am extra excited to talk about the effect of sleep on elite athletes with Dr. Cheri Mah today, because I have known her for quite some time, even before she became a doctor. So it's really exciting for me to see all the amazing work that she has been doing. And she's also a soon-to-be mom, so we'll dive into that later as well. Dr. Cheri Mah is a sleep physician and the adjunct lecturer at the Stanford Sleep Medicine Center. And over the past decade, her research has focused on the relationship between sleep and performance in elite athletes. She's worked with various championship teams in the NFL, NBA, NHL, and MLB, as well as international sports organizations on optimal sleep, travel, and performance strategies. She's served on the sleep expert board for the Nike Performance Council, advising Supermoon Capital and working with companies such as Gatorade, ESPN, Google, and various sleep technology startups. Her research and work has been featured all over, including New York Times, ESPN, NPR, NBC Bay Area, Time, BBC, and the Wall Street Journal, all these places. I know we're eager to hear what we as moms can learn from her work as well with athletes for ourselves and for our kids. So welcome, Dr. Mah.
Thanks for having me, Amy. Excited to be here.
Some are meeting you for the first time, so I'd love if you could share your story of how you came to where you are now.
Oh, okay. So I've been in the sleep field for now about 20 plus years. I was an undergrad at Stanford and had a unique opportunity when I was 17 to work with the founding father of modern sleep medicine. His name was Dr. William Dement. And he really started the modern field of sleep. So it's very young, only 60 years old from his initial work. He discovered that dreaming sleep, it's called REM sleep, and started kind of the first clinic at Stanford and what the field has evolved into. So I had a unique opportunity to do research and teaching with him. Fast forward, I stayed to do my master's and specifically started doing research on how we could pay back accumulated sleep debt. So when we don't get the sleep that we need every night, and what are the potentially positive benefits that we can note and observe when we actually get that sleep debt down to a small, sizable, small sleep debt. And we saw that with different sports, we saw performance improvements on the field. So men's basketball, they shot 9% improvement on their free throws and 3-point shots and faster sprint times, and looked at a spectrum of different sports at Stanford. And that really branched out into me working with different professional sports teams to apply the science into practice and trying to optimize this area that, let's be honest, it's one of the first things that we all sacrifice when our schedules get really busy. And then with athletes, they're in some ways a unique group in terms of they also have a lot of travel constraints and scheduling. But in a lot of ways, they're just like us, who also struggle with some of the very basic ways of how you can enhance just preparing and being ready to sleep when you want to. So that sort of launched me into a couple of years working with some startups and kind of going beyond the pro athlete, working with some industry partners. I went back for medicine as a later career decision. So I am board certified in internal medicine now, and I've been sleep medicine trained. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of my background in terms of how I got into this very interesting and unique area of sleep medicine.
Yeah, that's amazing, because you're right. It's the first thing to go, especially, in the crazy balancing everything days. I know you already touched on some of the performance sleep correlations. Can you expand a little bit on that and see some of the most exciting things perhaps that you see?
So a lot of the research in the sleep field has historically been looking at, unfortunately, a lot of the negative effects when we don't get sufficient sleep, either short term or over multiple days. So we say that's sleep restriction. And we know that affects everything from the cognitive area to physiology to physical performance. And what I was most interested in is, well, what's this other half of the story of, like, what are the interventions that we can do to enhance sleep and recovery? And can we pay back that accumulated sleep debt? So much of my research is really focused on, well, how long does that take? And how much do you need to get to try to see some of these benefits? And I've looked at that anywhere from 7 weeks of trying to get what we call sleep extension, so getting more than your body requires, to even shorter intervals of, say, 5 days, getting just an additional hour of sleep. So if you're someone who's getting 6 hours, they went to 7 hours, or 7 hours to 8 hours. That shorter study, for example, was in minor league baseball players a couple of years ago, and we showed that even that additional hour for 5 days can enhance visual search response time. So think about how you have to be able to see information, respond to it appropriately, and then react. And they also had faster processing speed time. And so they're able to make faster decisions. Or on the longer studies, as I've shared, we've seen a 9% improvement in free throw shots and faster sprint times. With football players, we see faster combine drills. So 40-yard dash is about 1/10 of a second faster is what we noted. And that could be the difference of, say, being drafted or not drafted. So, for a lot of these athletes, it was the novelty was the quantification of how much of a difference having a stronger foundation of healthy sleep could mean in terms of what that translated to on the field. So while all these athletes are looking for that 1%, arguably, sometimes we were showing it could be that 9% or even double digits. And that's obviously what's incredibly motivating for them when everything is around performance enhancement. But even if it's for this group, right, it's like to be at our best, it may not be that we quantify these numbers for ourselves each and every day, but arguably we also are high performers. And this is just an example of what that could look like when you quantify it, when it's on the field.
Absolutely. And I know you talked about sleep debt, and that's kind of a big focus of yours. Can we talk about that?
Yeah.
Because I know, like you said before, it's the first thing to go. We kind of keep having this sleep debt, right? And I think it sounds really, really great that we can pay it back. Can you go into more of that, of what that looks like, and how long can
Yes. Sure. So the idea of sleep debt, I think, is if that's one thing you get out of this session, I think it's incredibly important, because most don't realize that you can pay back sleep debt, at least acutely, and that it is something that accumulates over time. So let's just take, every one of us needs a certain amount of sleep every night, and there is individual variability. The lower threshold is 7 hours is recommended for every healthy adult to prevent health risks and performance decrements, but that's the lower end. I feel terrible on 7 hours of sleep. I know I need much more, like 8 or 9 hours, but everyone needs a little bit of a different total duration. So we call that your individual sleep requirement. Let's just throw it out there and say it's 8 hours. So if you only get 6 hours, say Monday to Friday, then you've built up a debt of 2 hours every night. So it comes to the end of your work week on Friday, and now you have 10 hours of debt built up, right? And that sleep debt will affect, as we mentioned, the cognitive, the physiology, and the physical performance. So it can affect making good judgments, your reaction time, your immune. And think of it like a credit card, right? You've now built that up, and the idea is that you can pay it back at least acutely. We think that in what you've accumulated in the last week, or perhaps the last month, you can pay back, and should. Whether or not you can really pay back, decades and decades of chronic sleep loss, I think is still up in the air. And arguably it's hard to do that, because we know there's some chronic health effects that can occur with chronic sleep loss. But again, acutely you can. So now if it's Saturday and it comes to the weekend, you sleep in, say you get 10 hours of sleep, hypothetically, you probably feel a little bit better. You're probably a little bit more refreshed, but in the bigger picture, you only paid back 2 of those hours of debt, right? Because you're in debt of 10 from the week. So now you're at 8 hours. So the bottom line is that it takes more than one night or even like one weekend typically of getting that sleep extension to pay back that sleep debt. And in the research that I've looked at, at least the first week to 2 weeks usually is the biggest bang for your buck in terms of performance benefit. So in the longer studies, yes, in 5, 6, 7 weeks of sleep extension, you can still see improvements, for example, in reaction time. But the biggest bang for your buck and the biggest change is in the first 1 to 2 weeks. And if you say, okay, Dr. Ma, that's already a really long time to try and extend my sleep, then like I mentioned, earlier, even 5 days that we showed in minor league baseball players did improve their cognitive processing speed and reaction time with just 5 days of that extra hour.
That's amazing. I need to go do that on the weekends. I find it hard to adjust my body, like it just wakes up, but hopefully.
Yes.
How about naps?
Power naps are fantastic. So
Okay.
you want to keep naps short to 20 to 30 minutes. That's your sweet spot.
Okay.
So set an alarm on your phone. Yes, you can account for a little bit of time if it takes you 5 or 10 minutes to fall asleep, but really you want to aim for about 20 to 30 minutes. The reason why is because it gives you a boost for a couple of hours, usually about 2 or 3, so you can time that closer in case you have an important meeting or something else in the evening time that you're trying to get to. And the time you want to aim for is typically 1 to 4 in the afternoon. That's when your body clock has a dip in alertness. So it's just easier to take that, say, afternoon siesta in the afternoon. What you want to avoid is the longer nap. So some people will take an hour or 2, and I'm sure you've also experienced it where you sometimes can wake up and you're more groggy, more sluggish or worn down. And the reason why is because you're waking up from deeper stages of sleep. And that is what we call sleep inertia. So you can feel that sluggishness, and that's what we want to avoid. So if you keep it short at the 20 to 30 minutes, you stay in lighter stages of sleep. And then the benefit too of the shorter naps is that it won't affect your sleep as much the following night, because I'm sure you've experienced taking an hour or 2-hour nap and then it's really challenging to sleep when you want to.
I love hearing the science behind it because I've absolutely done all those things before.
And for the tired moms, yeah, I was going to say also for the tired moms, another trick, if there's caffeine drinkers out there, is you can do what's called the caffeine nap or nappuccino. So what that means is you can take a cup of coffee or whatever your favorite caffeinated beverage is, and it takes about 15 minutes for it to kick in. Then if you go take your 20 to 30 minute power nap and you're able to fall asleep, typically within 5 or 10 minutes, then when you wake up, then bam, both the caffeine and the power nap will have kicked in. And there's research to show that that's actually more effective for alertness than either one alone, just the caffeine or just the power nap. So that's the fun trick of a nappuccino.
That's fascinating, because I would have thought that if you drink your caffeine or whatever way, you would not be able to sleep. But I guess you're sleeping before it hits, and then fascinating. Thank you. I'm going to go try my
It
nappuccino.
is the caveat you have to fall asleep within usually that 10-minute period. So if it takes you longer, then that may not be the tool for you. But for many, it is a helpful countermeasure, especially when you don't get, say, the sufficient 7-hour minimum at nighttime.
Worth a try. So I know athletes travel a lot, and so you've worked with them on the travel and the jet lag. Can you give us some tips on how you work with them for changing time zones?
Sure. So the rule of thumb is that for every time zone you cross, it takes approximately 1 day for your body to physiologically adjust. So just as an example, if you're on the West Coast and you're going to the East Coast, that's 3 time zones. It will take approximately 3 days for your body to readjust. You might feel better after a day, day and a half, but physiologically, everything hasn't quickly adjusted just yet. Now, the way that I advise my athletes and for everyone who's listening here is think about trying to break up your trip into 3 phases. I think a lot of people just jump on the airplane, get to a new location, and then try to adjust to that new time zone, which is probably not the best strategy. So what I want to encourage you to do is think about it, a pre-flight strategy, in-flight strategy, and your post-flight strategies. And what that means is that there's things that you can do even before you get onto the airplane to help your body have the best success of minimizing jet lag and getting to be acclimated. Again, there's all these different combinations of how many time zones you're crossing. Are you going eastward? Are you going westward? How long are you staying in a time zone? So what helps is that there are these online jet lag calculators or apps that can do those calculations for you and then give you a day-by-day rundown of different interventions that you can do. So I think they're helpful tools to just consider when you're traveling. But going back to that pre-flight, in-flight, and post-flight strategies, these also incorporate a lot of those strategies into their day-to-day recommendations. But what you can do in pre-flight, for one is really trying to make sure that you are getting sufficient sleep that night or two before you travel. I term it this panic packing that can happen, and then everyone stays up and gets not enough sleep before they fly. But we know insufficient sleep can worsen jet lag. So making sure you have that solid 1 to 2 nights under your belt. You can also, depending on which direction you're flying, say it's eastward where your clock needs to advance, you can actually start to shift your bedtime and your wake time, say 2 days before you fly. So for example, you shift your bedtime 30 minutes earlier and your wake up time 30 minutes earlier. Then you go outside in the morning and get sunlight, because the sunlight is the biggest stimulus to the brain to tell your body clock to shift. So if you do that, say for 2 days in advance of flying to the East Coast from the West Coast, then you really are only having to adjust maybe one time zone by the time you actually get there. So those are some pre-flight strategies. In flight, generally you want to hydrate really well, because dehydration will worsen jet lag. Avoiding the alcohol, the caffeine, depending on the time of the flight, oftentimes you don't want to actually nap. Again, it can depend on the direction you're flying, but if it's, for example, a flight from West Coast, East Coast in the daytime, you really want to avoid those naps or limit them to under 30 minutes, because it'll decrease your sleep drive and it'll make it much harder to sleep when you get to the East Coast and you have to shift to that earlier time zone. And then I would say post-flight strategies, again, depending on where you're going to go, but light is going to be the biggest stimulus to the brain and have your body clock shift. So seeking light at the right time or avoiding light can also be incredibly advantageous. And then using caffeine and power naps strategically. Melatonin can be helpful when you're eastward travel to help shift the body clock earlier. And again, I know these are a lot of different factors. So again, some of these apps or the online calculators can put all of it together for you, so it's easy to follow kind of day to day.
How about screen use? Because as we fly, right, there's often like this, I don't know, free for all screen use. And it's just like all the blue light coming in. But I guess once we land, as long as we get the light or try to adjust, do you have any sort of?
Yeah, so blue light definitely right before bed tends to not be advantageous, right? The blue frequency is coming from our phones and our laptops and our iPads. That tells your brain to stay awake. It can also prevent your own melatonin from being released, which is a signal that sleep should be coming and it's darker, and that's a preparation for getting to bed. And it also can, some studies have shown, affect the staging of your sleep as well. And so I know most of us are all plugged into devices that hour before bedtime, every time I've surveyed my pro athletes to, the working warrior. So I know easier said than done, but really, if it's not that I'm not encouraging you to still have that time to be on devices or socially connect, or if you're doing work, but can we just be more creative and rearrange the pieces of the puzzle so that that time happens, say, earlier in the evening after dinner time, or, prioritizing then that last, say, 30 minutes, ideally an hour before bed. So you actually have a good routine to process your racing thoughts or things that are on your mind, and then having a wind down. And so it's also giving yourself kind of that time and space to protect that period where we know it'll be most advantageous to be able to prepare to sleep. So yeah, the technology use is challenging, but I do encourage you to try and put that earlier in the night. And then same thing for your kids. The kids that we know don't have technology in the room tend to do better in school and sleep better without that technology use. On the airplane, that's okay. I kind of generally say what gets you through the flight is not too bad, especially if you're flying in the daytime. So it's really trying to avoid the technology right before you're sleeping.
Yeah. And I guess that's a good point, because when I asked about the, technology in the plane, like once you get off, you're going to be walking through the airport, getting to your whatever destination. So you have that hour plus, right? Before. Perfect. How else do you work most commonly with athletes in figuring out how to improve their sleep? I know it's very individual, but what are some common things that you work
The
with?
way I break it down for most athletes in developing a plan for their sleep is having a targeted goal in 3 different sleep buckets. And that's what I would encourage everyone here to do as well. So there's the first bucket is sleep duration. But it's not just sleep duration that we care about. We've already talked about 7 hours being that minimum, and that's okay if you're not there, right? So if you're someone who's getting 6 hours of sleep, I encourage everyone to try and make even 15 minutes or 30 minutes of an adjustment to say this week as an average. So again, if you're at 6 hours, get to 6.5 this week. And the next week, go to like 6 hours and 45 minutes till you work your way up to 7 hours. It's all about small, gradual changes. And even 15 minutes can make a huge difference. That's a difference. But yes, for all the moms out there, from an A student to like a B student, or from a B student, it's 11 minutes to the difference of a C student. So it's not huge differences that we're really going for, is trying to have just small 15 to 30 minute increments. So that would be sleep duration. So that's one bucket that you try to aim to at least work your way to 7 hours. And then there's the quality bucket, which there's a lot of factors that can affect sleep quality. But I think one of the biggest things in particular that everyone can benefit from is having a wind down routine. And when I say that, it can be something that you enjoy, that's relaxing, that doesn't involve technology. Even if it's, some people really enjoy reading a real book, or for my athletes, it's stretching or doing breathing exercises, because that will increase your parasympathetic system to help you relax and dampen down the sympathetic system. Some people like listening to audiobooks or listening to chill music. Whatever it is, my challenge to you is really even starting with 5 minutes tonight. Yes, you want to build it up maybe to 10 minutes, 20 minutes eventually, but I think we all have 5 minutes. And so having that transition period can be incredibly helpful to prepare your brain and your body to wind down and actually sleep at nighttime. In the quality bucket, obviously, there's a number of other factors we want to evaluate. Caffeine and alcohol, those are two culprits that will clearly keep people awake. So caffeine has a half-life of about 6 hours, which means you have a coffee or a caffeinated beverage at dinner, at dinner time. So then 6 hours later at midnight, half of it's still active. Or alcohol, people think it helps them fall asleep, which it does, but then it really fragments your sleep in those early morning hours. Your environment can have a huge impact too, in terms of if there's light or there's temperature that's too warm, or you're not comfortable on your sleep surface. So I tell everyone to make it like a cave, really dark and quiet, cool and comfortable. Temperatures cooler around 60 to 67 tend to be better, but you can experiment by knocking it down a degree every couple of days. And then obviously the other things that you do in the daytime will affect quality of sleep. So we've talked about the napping and your nap habits, or do you even get sunlight in the morning time? 30 minutes of sunlight in basically the first hour when you're waking up is one of the best signals to your brain and your body to control when you're going to sleep and wake and what time zone you're in. So getting 30 minutes of sunlight, whether it's going for a walk or getting and eating breakfast outside, is a good way to start your day. So there's a lot that goes into the quality bucket, but I would say choose one goal in there. And then the third bucket is the timing of your sleep. So our bodies like regularity, and the more consistent you can be with the same bedtime and wake time, weekdays and weekends, is going to be better than what we often experience, which is sometimes you'll get insufficient sleep on weekdays and then yo-yo and get much more, say, on the weekends or your days off. And that's far from ideal. But even if your bedtime right now has a window of, say, 2 hours, sometimes it's 10 o'clock, sometimes it's midnight, trying to target a more narrow window, even if it's down to 1 hour, would be like the first step. So that's how I work with athletes, at least in crafting a goal in each of these three buckets. And again, it's all about the small changes. So making sure that you're having one goal in each of these and working way each week is what I would recommend.
Yeah. Oh, I've taken away several things in my mental note there, because I live like a very office life most of the time, right? Like working at your computer and not seeing the sun, or like scrambling with the kids and getting them out to school within 30 minutes or whatever it is. So I need to go just maybe stretch outside real quick, see the sun, and then start my day, and maybe I'll be a more pleasant mom too.
No, definitely. Even if you're starting with like 10 minutes of that sunlight, and like I said, opening the blinds and like having breakfast outside, or being able to be closer to windows if you can't necessarily get outside. Those are all just great practices to give yourself the biggest boost, both in alertness and then starting your day, because it'll help set and regulate your body clock as well.
It was also funny you mentioned like caffeine and alcohol, because my husband has like kept cutting like, or moved forward his caffeine cutoff time from afternoon. And I think now, like, even anytime afternoon is off limits. So
Yes,
it's a real
there's
thing.
yeah, there's some people who are fast metabolizers of caffeine and others that are slower metabolizers. So definitely giving yourself a cutoff, usually in the early afternoon, is going to be the best time to try to avoid anything subsequently. But sometimes people will still have it later in the evening time, and it's definitely one culprit that can keep people up much longer than they hope for.
Yeah. Actually, I have one more follow up. How about as we age? Because I know my mom gets much less sleep than she used to, or than the rest of us. Is that a thing as we age, that we need less sleep, or is that just a myth?
No, great question. So as we age, we do think that the duration that you need stays approximately the same. But what happens is the type of sleep, so the sleep stages you get change as you age. So you have light sleep and you have deep sleep, and then you have what's called REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep, when you dream a lot. And you go through this cycle of light, deep, REM every 90 minutes to 120 minutes throughout the nighttime. But as you age, what happens, and this is actually more pronounced in men, is that you lose more of that deep sleep. And so as you get older, a lot of men will say, well, I don't get as much of that deep, restful, really rejuvenating feeling of sleeping like I did when I was 20. And the reality is because you're not getting as much of that deep sleep any longer. And so what gets substituted is typically lighter sleep, which means some people will have more awakenings in those lighter stages. And then they feel like they don't need as much from a duration because there's more awakenings. But we don't think that it necessarily changes from a total duration. It's just as that the proportion of these stages gets altered as we age and go through the life cycle. So for your mom, I would say she still probably needs still close to what she required earlier, but really it's more important to understand if she feels refreshed when she wakes up and has like good energy through the daytime. That's going to be what we care more about in terms of her functioning from in the day.
Sounds good. Thank you. I'll let her know.
Yeah.
And then as you go into motherhood, are there certain things that you are keeping top of mind for yourself because you have all these tools in your pocket?
Oh man, good question. So I had shared with Amy, I'm 7 months pregnant right now, so about to enter motherhood, and ironically, my sleep is not as ideal as what it was when I wasn't pregnant. But I'm trying to do the things that I know are helpful in terms of like the wind down routine, in terms of trying to be comfortable in my mattress and sleeping surface and temperature regulation, especially right now we're in the summer months, and that can also make a difference of awakenings. I think going into motherhood, I'm going to hopefully be mindful of trying to just craft a really good sleep routine for my son. I've seen that be incredibly helpful to have that regularity with other friends who are moms and their kids. But we know that when you start crafting those habits very early on, we know that hopefully can lend towards better habits into, young toddlerhood, into elementary school, and then beyond. Because sometimes, I think when I encounter some of these college students now, or even my pro athletes, some of them have never had any of these sleep habits taught to them or even discussed until now when they're in their 20s. And so I think the earlier we can really craft not just a better approach to their sleep, but having that regularity, the routine, and having the things that are sleep smart choices in the daytime early on will only be advantageous to the little ones, and then as they go through their life. So that's hopefully what I'm going to be trying to be mindful of.
That's what we can do, or that's the only thing we can do as parents, right? Try to give them good foundations for the future.
Well, I think sometimes it's funny, like we sometimes are not good as adults about our sleep habits or crafting this, but we tend to be better sometimes with our kids, at least what I've observed. So, I think it's just one thing to be even more mindful of, that you can have a big effect on kind of that long-term sleep health and overall health when you start earlier on with this particular area, just like you do probably with nutrition or thinking about physical activity. But sleep tends to, again, be one of the first things that we sacrifice for ourselves.
Especially as moms, right? We do things for other people, and then finally at the end of the night, it's our time, or whatever you want to see. So good things to keep in mind. And I think we already kind of touched on a quick challenge for our moms, but can we recap that really quick? because we like to end with a quick action or challenge that moms can take today, and then come back with questions or let us know how it went. Can we recap that challenge for them?
Sure. So my challenge for the moms out there is to have a goal in each of the 3 sleep buckets. So first bucket being sleep duration. Try to work your way up to 7 hours if you're not there yet, but gradually by 15 or 30 minutes more this week. Second bucket is your sleep quality. So if it's 5 minutes, I challenge you to have some type of wind down routine at the very least to help yourself transition from the craziness of the day to actually preparing your brain and your body to sleep. So choose a breathing exercise, meditation, journaling, reading a real book, listening to music, your choice, whatever you enjoy. Give yourself that time. And then a third bucket is the timing of your sleep. So really the goal is the same bedtime wake time weekdays and weekends. But if that's not where you are right now and you have, say, a 2-hour window when you actually try to go to bed, then try to narrow that, say, to a 1-hour window. One easy thing to help you stay on target is just setting an alarm on your phone to go off, say 30 minutes before you actually want to start your wind down routine. So at least you have a reminder is that, hey, you have 30 minutes to wrap up your day so you can actually hit your targeted wind down and then the bedtime that you're really aiming for. So that would be my three buckets, but a goal in each as a practical way to try and improve your sleep tonight.
That sounds fantastic. If people want to connect with you further, where can they come find you?
Sure. Instagram and Twitter are the 2 that you can feel free to send me a message or follow along. My handle is Cheri, CHERI _Mah, MAH, both on Twitter and Instagram.
Perfect. And we'll have those links included as well. Anything else you want to share with our mamas before we wrap up?
I hope everyone sleeps just a little better tonight. So cut down those power naps and aim for just 1 or 2 changes. And I hope you sleep better after this.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Mah, for sharing such great information about sleep. It's just really foundational, and yet it has a tendency to be neglected. So everyone, go do the challenges, set your goals, tell us how it went, and be sure to come back for more amazing summit speakers.
Thanks so much for having me.